In the many sagas that have occurred within the world of Christian Weston Chandler, Sonichu has been a recurring character despite being completely fictional. Sonichu is right there with the love quest as being a driving force behind Chris's decisions. This character is considered, by Chris at least, to be his magnum opus, and as such he has shoehorned him into various projects throughout the years. Sonichu isn't exactly the most well thought out character. He's clearly a combination of Sonic the Hedgehog and Pikachu, but who doesn't know that? The comics themselves are really nothing to write home about. Sure, they're pretty expansive for being written by a man who is autistic and notoriously lazy, but similar to their titular character, they're riddled with stolen ideas. The comics were made to be entertaining and humorous, relying a lot on references to popular media that Chris had a rudimentary knowledge of. This in part is due to Chris's patented random access humor, which is yet to produce anything intentionally funny. The quality of the comics has been a major point of scrutiny for Chris because, I mean, they really are just crap. The art is not good, the plots aren't great despite being lifted from other pieces of media, and all around it just falls flat on its face as a piece of fiction. Which is saying something because fanfiction usually tends to be pretty terrible in and of itself. The infamy of Chris Chan and his comic series would help both reach heights never before seen by people online. Nobody could have anticipated one person making this big of a clown of themselves. Chris, despite the negative attention he had received, always goes out of his way to attempt to correct dissenting voices. He believed that he was just an innocent victim in a mass smear campaign orchestrated by a handful of crafty trolls backed by their army of angry basement-dwelling dorks. Everything in his life has become the subject of mockery, especially his comic series, which Chris believed to be the finest thing he would ever create. When he dies, Sonichu will be his remaining gift to our dimension. At least, that's what he's convinced himself of anyway. People would often take his original characters and corrupt them in ways that would trigger his unending ire, such as making Sonichu homosexual or giving Rosechus an impressive and throbbing pickle. Not only did he see this as harassment and attempted vandalism, but also personal attacks against his own character, because Sonichu is an extension of himself. For all intents and purposes, that crummy little comic is his baby. Websites dedicated to his comics were trashed. His dreams of creating a comic and video game franchise built off the groundwork he laid down for his Sonic recolors were destroyed time and time again. And despite all of this, he kept trying, and I mean that in a very liberal sense, to keep his pet project alive. No matter what Chris said or did, the criticism would keep coming in. The trolls were wrong, Chris wasn't an idiot, and his comics were just a parody, not thievery. Curse those damn trolls. It was only a matter of time before someone of superior talent would come along to create a parody of a parody. A comic series that could rival the genius of Sonichu by being self-aware and breaking down the very issues that persist within Chris Chan's creations. One spectacular individual, known only as Alec Benson Leary, tossed his hat into the ring to combat the onslaught of autistic rage from the forthcoming CPU goddess. Using his tremendous powers of freelance comic book creation, Alec would shake the Quikiverse with his bombastic comic, Asperchu. The Asperchu saga is one of the most prolific segments of Chris Chan's history, as it perfectly outlines how Chris views fictional media and the characters that reside within it. It helps illustrate just how important Sonichu was to its creator, how far people would go to get a few laughs, and how Chris only wanted to take down dissenting opinions when it was a true and honest representation of him in his electric hedgehog Pokemon. During this video, we will break down the Asperchu saga, covering the many twists and turns in the narrative. We'll briefly touch on the tale of the Wikipedia, we will glance at comic pages when necessary, and we'll see just how important Asperchu is to the grand story of Christian Weston Chandler. The primary antagonist of the Asperchu saga, or rather the protagonist depending on how you look at it, is Alec Benson Leary. He was born on the 25th of December 1982 in beautiful Eden Prairie, Minnesota. He was diagnosed with Asperger's at a young age. Not much else is known about his background, but I'm sure all of it was true and honest. He's an aspiring comic book writer and artist, spending years refining his craft to become one of the greats, inspired by the illustrious pioneers of comic literature. His childhood was spent reading fiction, studying the colorful and detailed drawings within the pages of his favorite comic books, coming up with his own ideas for stories and the worlds that they would happen in. He was gleaming with potential, and one day he'd create his finest work, something that would truly put him on the map with the stars of the industry. As fate would have it, Alec would discover a long-running comic series created by the internet's most notorious and prolific figure, Sonichu, created by the infamous Christian Weston Chandler. This series has it all: shitty art, drama, violence, gratuitous sex, plagiarism, copyright infringement, and some world-class autism. Inspired by Sonichu and its creator, Alec pecked away at his keyboard and drew up some storyboards for what would later become his finest work. He spent many nights on this, figuring out how to really prove himself to his newfound idol. It was going to take a long time for him to create a product that he was happy with, but in due time, my friends, in due time. This personal project would change shape and become something far greater than anything Alec could have predicted. He followed the footsteps of the mighty Christian and stole from the best. This culmination of intellectual property theft and parodic commentary would be known as Asperchu. Asperchu is a clear mockery of Sonichu and its creator. The visual inspiration for Asperchu was based around Christian's own appearance, with them both being overweight, wearing glasses, a medallion, both were intellectually disabled, and they both wanted to find a boyfriend-free girl, the whole shebang. However, concerning the disability part, Asperchu was diagnosed with Asperger's, similar to Chris with autism. This was back in a time when experts were convinced that they were two separate disorders. Even then, the similarities were so close. But Christian refused to acknowledge people with Asperger's as he believed they were, quote, stealing the thunder from people with autism. This worked perfectly for the Asperchu character. The comic went on for many issues, covering a variety of emotional tales, all from the mind of Alec. This publication would be a major source of stress for Christian, yet another problem for him to run away from. After sharing Asperchu with the internet, Alec made several attempts to contact Chris to let him know just how instrumental he was in the creation of his newest baby. Chris never responded, or maybe, just hear me out here, Alec made this part up, but who knows. Theatrics like this make it much more enjoyable. Alec did, however, make contact with Chris via the Wikipedia mailbag, specifically in mailbag number 10. This message was emotionally driven, as not only did Alec put his heart and soul into his comic, but his experience with Asperger's too. He included an image of Asperchu and Sonichu embracing while Asperchu shares his feelings about Sonichu and Chris. Alec, totally not being a troll or anything, sent that image with the following text. Chris, this is Alec. Why have you not responded to the truly amazing comic I sent you? I am referring, of course, to my one true and honest creation, the original Asperchu, the electric/Asperger's type hedgehog Pokemon, which I recently showed to you as a token of my esteem for you. I think you are perhaps scared or confused by my rise to greatness. If I knew you were ever going to be worried by my meteoric rise to fame, I would never have written to you with such uncareful regard for your feelings. I wanted you to know that you have inspired me to greatness, not to take anything away. You have recently written your feelings on the Asperger's, which shows me that you are worried that one such as I wants to take away your fame and glory, and I assure you this is simply the furthest from the truth. Allow me to enlighten you on the real nature of the Asperger's, which as you say is not like the autism. For one, we Asperger's folks have the troubles communicating to other people. We are very shy and have trouble making others understand us. We also, secondly, have trouble with focusing too much on one thing at a time. I think that is where the confusion lies. For people see your utter devotion to only Sonichu in your PlayStation 3 and nothing else is perhaps connected to Asperger's. They do not realize that the fact that you do not have time for lesser things like work and friends is a sign of a true and honest artist. On a second note, I think you were scared of my speaking to you because I compared myself to you. You see, I did not mean to compare my Asperger's to your autism, for as you say, the two are totally and completely different and are never and have never been the same. The only way I wanted to compare myself to you is that as you are an artist, I aspire to be an amazing artist as well. I hope you will accept my peace offering of Asperchu and Sonichu meeting as friends that I have attached. Your friend and protege, Alec Benson Leary. Chris responded with the expected amount of vitriol he's known for. He could not have possibly felt flattered when seeing himself in Asperchu, right? His message reads as follows. Firstly, you wish you were me, and second, I apologize for putting your letter into the reject page, but I felt it necessary because 1. You are obviously a troll from what you have typed, and 2. Your drawing infers homosexuality, and I do not care for that goddamn lifestyle or whatever word is used to describe it. Unsurprisingly, Chris took major issue with the gay undertones of the supplied image, because how dare anyone think that he or his gay little Pokemon are, well, gay? Alec waited a bit after this exchange and would later try to reach out once more in mailbag 15. This time, he apologized for any further transgressions and amended his mistake regarding Sonichu's sexuality by including further proof that he and Asperchu are straight and godly. Christian, first of all, I wish to say how sorry I am. I have nothing but the greatest respect for you and your artistic talent. I only meant to show you how awesome I think Sonichu is. I never meant to suggest that Sonichu was a despicable homo-gay. I only wanted to show Asperchu and his brother Sonichu having good, godly, straight fun together as friends and brothers. So to make up for my previous error, I have created a completely new image to show how they are both manly men enjoying the joys of brotherhood. Your friend and protege, Alec Benson Leary. Chris was of course as agitated as before, ready to verbally brawl because of someone apologizing for making something look too gay. You have done wrong with this drawing. It only depicts the opposite of straight, you DA. There may be a human character coming into the books with Asperger's, but there will certainly never be a Sonichu or Rosechus with that ailment. I can't believe that Chris wouldn't allow any Sonichu or Rosechus to live with Asperger's, instead opting for them to all be autistic. Chris was truly thinking outside of the box here. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Since I've introduced Alec to all of you as best as I can, I think it's time we spent a while dissecting the character of Asperchu in more detail. I mean, his name is in the title of the video and he's in the thumbnail, so I might as well. As stated before, he was a parody of Christian and his Sonichu character, serving as the protagonist for the titular Asperchu series. As the Quickie describes him, Asperchu is a quote, high-functioning electric Asperger's hedgehog Pokemon. He lacks any electric abilities, but instead his attacks are powered by his mighty Asperger's, which makes him noticeably more dangerous to autistic Pokemon. He even has his own form of a Cursehameha, known as the Asperhameha, which will daze his opponents, making them confused and left questioning what the fuck just happened. More fictional characters need to just confuse the shit out of their enemies. That is quite the effective tactic if I do say so myself. Asperchu is largely motivated by a love quest similar to Christian, where he's searching for a romantic partner to love and to hold. A sweetheart that he can build from the ground up. And you know, get some of that well-deserved hanky-panky when he wants it. His requirements for a lover are pretty similar to the CPU goddess, but you better not be a fucking ginger. He can't stand them or people that like them. Unfortunately for me, I don't think Asperchu and I will ever have a fruitful relationship. My heart is aching from the loss. He also won't accept being in a relationship with anybody who has a mental handicap. Funny how that works out, right? I wonder who that's based off of. His love quest was actually his God-given mission to bring his dream daughter into fruition, whom he dubbed the name Asperia. Asperia did exist at one point in the story. Asperchu had gone back in time and happened to cross paths with Ian Brandon Anderson, more on him later. The two shared a nice refreshing carbonated beverage that was tainted with a trace of navy. This impregnated Asperchu, and he subsequently shit out a malformed abomination and gave it a name, that name being Asperia. Asperchu was initially thrilled to finally have the daughter that he had dreamt of for so long, but in his typical fashion, he got tired of the responsibility of fatherhood. I mean, you can't spend hours rearranging trees in Animal Crossing if you've got a deformed little nitwit in the other room crying for food and water or some shit. Because of his distaste for taking on any responsibility, he offloaded the creature onto his grandma so he could keep dicking around with his hobbies. A man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. This is merely a parallel between Asperchu and the real Christian, because one could argue this is the same outcome that would happen if Chris was left in charge of a child. Well, minus the ass birth part. But I guess Chris couldn't offload a child onto Barb now, but you know, you get the idea. He resides in beautiful Minnesota with his loving grandparents, Grandpa Alcichu and Grandma Snorlax. Asperchu had to live with his grandparents due to the fact that his mother was nowhere to be found and his father disappeared at some point during the early 2000s. This undoubtedly took an emotional toll on Asperchu and made him recluse into his favorite media, like Xbox 360 games, creating his own world-renowned YouTube videos, beating his meat until it's raw, or hanging out with his heterosexual life mates. No gal pals to be found here. His relationship with his friends and family is almost always negative because everyone is tired of him being a lazy schlub. His grandparents are significant because they helped him turn into the stunning young man that he is today. Grandma Snorlax is a bit of a lazy fuck, considering she's a Snorlax and all. Most of her days are spent basking in the sun, sleeping in her backyard, absorbing all that precious vitamin D. She slept so well that she never even noticed when Asperia was chewing off her leg for sustenance. Asperia was a growing girl. She needed all the nutrition that she could get. Grandpa Alcichu was your typical old fart who is practically glued to his lazy boy, loves to watch TV for countless hours, and shares racist anecdotes when so inclined. He had lived an accomplished life and felt that he deserved to live peacefully in retirement, but that would require him to not be around Asperchu, and that is kind of hard to do when you live with him. The events of Asperchu take place in a parallel universe to that of the standard Sonichu canon, or perhaps Asperchu was a direct retconning of Christian Chandler's acclaimed franchise. Hard to say. Because of this direct connection, there are many characters from that franchise that appear in this story, including but not limited to Christian Weston Chandler, the man, the myth, the legend. His appearance is clearly based on Liquid, who is the true and honest mayor of CWCville and the real creator of the Sonichu series. Similarly, Ian Brandon Anderson plays the role of a villain, and is a clear-as-day spoof of that guy who stole Liquid's identity. The chaotic combo is present, some of them die later, but that's probably for the best. This roster includes Wild Sonichu, who is now very gay, Angelica Rosechus, who remains largely the same, Punchy Sonichu, whose accent is played up due to him being Asian, Bubbles, who is now developmentally disabled. She might have been before, but I'm not a fluent expert in Sonichu lore. And Magi-chan, who is just as perverse and unstoppably horny as ever. There's other classic Sonichu characters like Bionic the Hedgehog, which is a character that actually predates Sonichu, making him the first recolor in recorded Christory. But I suppose that matters very little to the topic at hand. Many trolls and villains from Christory also appear, including but not limited to Clyde Cash, Mary Lee Walsh, Jason Kendrick Howell, Jack Thaddeus, Reldnak Natsu Natsirk, and plenty of more unscrupulous individuals. One of my favorite parallels to Sonichu is the inclusion of Chaos Pickles, a parody of Sonichu balls which in actuality were just copying Dragon Balls and the Chaos Emeralds, but are we even surprised? The Chaos Pickles contain a powerful energy within them, and they are located within the rectal cavities of various people in the Asperverse. Each Chaos Pickle is named in accordance to the 7 heavenly virtues: kindness, temperance, patience, charity, chastity, diligence, and humility. The last two were never properly revealed, but we do know diligence was lodged up Asperchu's ass, and humility was likely somewhere similar in Ian. During the comic's lifespan, which began on December 4th, 2009 and ended on February 13th, 2011, it was spread far and wide within the community of Chris's onlookers. Each issue was specially tailored to Chris, making fun of him for his innumerable faults and failures. It didn't matter how much effort was put in or what part of Chris's character was being mocked, Chris would undoubtedly read the entire thing and complain about it later. I mean, what else is he gonna do? Find a job? Yeah, right. Each issue would rub Chris the wrong way and he'd have to make it known that he disapproved of what was being written. Parody is only okay when he does it, not the other way around. He is infallible and should not be stifled, but God Jesus help you if you try to get a word in edgewise. The Asperchu comic series, known as The Amazing Asperchu and of course The Spectacular Asperchu and Asperchu The Amazing Tales, spans across 10 individual comics, 17 if you include sub-episodes and miscellaneous editions. The content of the comics is largely built around the stories already established in the official Sonichu canon, while tastefully mixing in anecdotes about Christian's life, much in the same way that he did in his true and honest fashion. This is arguably a more grounded take on the Sonichu lore, as while Chris's comic is merely a self-gratifying story where he's always the victim and the hero, Asperchu's subject matter routinely revolves around him getting ridiculed for his childish behavior. Pretty much all of the story's cast dislikes Asperchu for various valid reasons. This, of course, came to the ire of Chris, who said, "I detest Asperchu for one. It is a parody of a Sonichu with Asperger's, which with the condition I have no care for. And two, it is just lousy. If Asperger's is really like autism, then the creator really knows nothing about autism." The popularity of Asperchu, while of course placed in the shadow of Sonichu, warranted a lot of community-driven fan content to be made. This ranged from well-made fan art pieces, supplemental stories created by avid readers, and even fully animated intro to a series that was never made, featuring a stunning theme song.
Who's a hero whose heroic deeds aren't recognized? Brings all of the trolls attacking Quickville down to their demise. Christian would lead you to believe he is just a parody. However, he's not clever, he's original, we guarantee. Asperchu.
Isn't it great when a piece of fan content becomes so popular that it itself ends up receiving fan-made material? I think it's kind of beautiful and poetic in a way, especially considering Chris wanted his Sonichu project to reach heights unseen by any webcomic before. You have to appreciate the little things, even if it is a bit of autistic needling. Speaking of fan materials, there's one that is actually quite funny in retrospect. Despite all of the quarrels between Chris and Alec that we're going to go over, a medallion of Asperchu was handcrafted and sent to Chris. He believed that it was actually made by Alec and sent to him as a gesture of goodwill, maybe to mend any wounds from their skirmishes on the internet, but in reality it was actually made by a fan of Alec who initially intended to send it to him. However, Alec convinced him to send it to Chris instead so that he might wear it in a future video. Chris accepted this gift, but would rarely wear it himself, only to be worn most frequently by the mysterious friends in a few skit videos where Chris and an unspecified person goof around in Casa de Chandler. One of the only times Chris would wear it was on October 7th, 2010, where he did a terrible impression of Alec to epically own his troll ass.
But no, I'm not really Christian Weston Chandler, and I'm not the creator of Sonichu, because I live in Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia. At least as far as I know my own originality, or I get a point because I never put up a page for myself. In real life, it's just only mocking Christian Weston Chandler in Virginia. Except now, I am mocking Alec Benson Leary. I pretend to be Alec Benson Leary. Oh, look at me, I'm Alec. I draw everybody. I draw everything in squares. I think I'm essential images in the background. I kill everybody. I got blood all over the place. I killed the real Christian Weston Chandler. I even killed the second
The medallion was unfortunately destroyed in the January 2014 house fire. Anyway, back on track, much like the original Wikipedia and the now persistent Quickie, a Wikipedia-styled site was created to document the various intricacies of the Asperchu comic. Alec set up a media wiki site for his project after he had completed a handful of issues for the series, where people could come and read the comic and share their thoughts and ideas alongside keeping track of every little minute detail that they deemed worthy of archival. This also served as a direct line to contact Alec. A notable thing about this site was its use for bullying Chris, but you probably already figured that. Chris was not happy about the success of Asperchu and saw its website as a blatant copy of his original work. He did his best to decry the actions of the trolls, unknowingly bringing even more attention to the shit that he wanted to suffocate. But Asperchu still needed further reach in order to achieve any worthwhile notoriety. Jack Thaddeus, a relatively new troll at the time, had a genius idea to get under Chris's skin and help the Asperchu brand spread. The Wikipedia was a large project that needed funding, and as such ad space would be rented out to the highest bidder. Jack Thaddeus didn't want to see the site fall like many other personal sites that had come before it, and threw money at the webpage so that way he could rent the highly sought-after ad space that surrounded the site. At first, he ran pro-gay ads, much to the chagrin of Christian, but he later moved on to advertising the Asperpedia, which would push whatever social or political message that the site was promoting at that time. The advertisements rubbed Chris the wrong way, or I suppose the right way given the goal of the ads, and he made sure to declare his distaste for any malicious troll parodies of his illustrious Sonichu franchise.
On the one hand, I am pleased to announce that I have finally got through the homosexuals' thick skulls that I am straight and I do not care for their kind. On the other hand, it backfired on me because Alec something paid off Jack Thaddeus for the ad space and now is wrongfully advertising his fan fiction, and I emphasize fact fiction, and parodic Asperchu. Not only is he trying to play on any links between Asperger's and autism, which there are not. I'm not saying similarities, I'm saying links. Anyway, his character not only is a parody and vulgar fan fiction of my Sonichu character, but he plays off of my past Buddha belly and my masculine bosoms. He is not to be trusted, and his comics are not to be read.
But don't worry, the constant prodding from random people online did elicit delicious tar to rage from the internet's favorite punching bag. He wasn't going to let people drag his name through the mud and tear down his reputation, because that totally hadn't already happened 10 times over at that point, right?
Asperchu is not mine. I am sick and tired of being misassociated with him. He is not mine, and I would never care to associate with him, because he is a bunch of crap. He just looks like a parody of me with a Buddha belly and exaggerated man boobs. I am so sick and tired of him. And also, Rosechus has always been a woman. If you look on page 3 of book number 1, it says right there that Rosechus was a girl, quote-unquote, girl Rosechus. And Sonichu has been straight the whole time. He's always been straight. Rosechus always been a woman.
Chris showed his fangs, shaking his fist to evoke fear out of his detractors. I mean, wouldn't you shit your pants if a stay-at-home man-baby told you that he was going to inflict harm upon you because you found him to be humorous? I'm shaking my boots just from the thought. Alec, being the mature individual that he is, did not immediately respond to these hateful, mean-spirited threats. A fan wrote Alec an email, inquiring about the potential weight behind the threats made by Chris. The message reads as follows. Hi Alec, I just wanted to know if you have seen the latest video by the dastardly Christopher Weston Chandler, aka Ian Brandon Anderson. In it, on top of getting your name wrong, he made several slanders against your good name, and even had the gall to call your comic parodic. I sincerely hope that you will not let this attack stand, for it's obvious that he is jealous of both your comic and your good fortune. Also, I urge you to take precautions against Chris. He looks unhinged, and it looks like he made a death threat against you. I really hope that you take care of yourself, good sir, because I worry about the stability of Chris. Take care, and I can't wait to see your next comic. Alec responded professionally, taking into account how real those threats might actually be. Unlike our favorite pants-shitting drama magnet, Alec knew just how to handle dissenting opinion. Hello, Anthony. I indeed have watched the most recent video by that sorrowful IBA. I would like him to get my name correct, as my last name is not something. But one too many times I have seen how little respect he has, even for those who give him nothing but respect. I will naturally not let the comic stand at all. My weapon of choice in this war is to simply continue making the comic to the best of my abilities, which thankfully have far exceeded his own. I do not fear for the death threats, but rather I rejoice in knowing that I am a valiant warrior in the struggle against oppression. You might say I'm like the Gandhi to his British Empire. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We all must stand united as one against this foe. Unlike Chris, Alec was incredibly charitable during his period of creating his comic, putting up a banner on his website to help the victims of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. While it's unknown how much money was raised, if any amount was even generated by the banner, it still made Alec look like a lot more hospitable person when compared to the likes of Mr. Chandler. The site was partly run by Mao Bamboo Ling, a close friend of Alec. While Alec's approach to running the site was a lot more sociable and humanitarian, Mao's angle for operating things was a lot more brusque. He had no qualms about interacting with Chris or running his mouth to talk shit. He'd always say what was on his mind. On May 27, 2010, Mao took over the Wikipedia and subsequently deleted it, using it as a bargaining chip against Comic Fury, a webcomic hosting site, as there was no way for them to haggle with Chris for a lower price, so they ultimately had to sign with him because there was nobody else there to interject. The Asperpedia was also sold during this time, for an alleged whopping $150,000. I'm sure that sum of money is totally legit. The Asperpedia would later be shut down, much to the disappointment of Asperchu's legion of fans. When asked about this, Alec stated, quote, "It was ran by a spaz lord who took it down randomly in a fidgety fit one day. I didn't care to fight for it." Which, again, is a very mature response to such a thing. He didn't need Asperchu in his life, unlike how Chris needs Sonichu in his. Chris was not going to let this type of malicious reappropriation of his true and honest recolors fly, and he showed his displeasure with the troll's actions on January 19, 2010. He uploaded 12 pages for Sonichu number 10 of his Sonichu comic series, wherein Chris and Ultra Sonichu destroy the vile Asperpedia and cure Alec's creations of their oh-so-terrible Asperger's diagnosis. Alec was the sole cause of the Asperger's diagnosis somehow, too. This all happens before a battle with Metal Asperchu. I'm not even joking. Chris honestly believed that the best way he could get back at his detractors is by incorporating their work into his project, to claim everything they make as their own, only to push back when he received enough pressure, arguing that he was just writing a parody. Sure, right, Chris. Speaking of the murderous villain of Asperchu, Metal Asperchu, Chris would just rip characters out of other people's work, because fuck everyone else. It's only original when he does it. He stole Grandma Snorlax, which is an obvious spoof of his own mom. I can only assume that he stole her specifically because she got him all hot and bothered. We all know how Chris feels about, well, you know. Another interesting thing to note about this comic is that Chris actually tried to claim that Alec was some kind of sick freak. Now, how could he possibly try to justify such a harsh accusation? Certainly, he'd provide extraordinary evidence for his extraordinary claim. After a selection of characters were cured of their Asperger's, two characters named Kitty and Trisha Rosechew passingly mentioned that Alec had Rosechews trapped in his basement. The obvious implication here is that Alec would kidnap, physically abuse, and rape Rosechews because he's a nasty little bastard. This inevitably caused Chris to receive hard backlash for making such a foul assertion about someone. He had to put out a post-release clarification about what he had tried to say in his comic, and it's about as sincere as you would expect. With those main topics addressed, I have another few to address. I will now admit that Alec has a sizable fan base in comparison. Evan had originally given me permission before to use Sonichu, but for some odd reason, he chose to withdraw the permission. Simonla was not mine to begin with, as it was originally based off of Sonichu. I had edited her Wikipedia bio page to state that she was not of such. Having created Simonla, I had gone against Evan's wishes, and I apologize for that. Also, Alec is not naive, and I apologize for calling him that. I apologize to Mao for cursing him, and I offer a forgiveness blessing. I apologize for intruding on Alec's property and stealing his Asperchu and his parodic characters. I also apologize to Alec for labeling him with the crime of female imprisonment. It was an assumption. I also had no intention of portraying any raping going on. I repeat, they were being treated like mistreated hamsters. No one rapes hamsters ever. While I did have real-life events to deal with, I still had no excuse for not updating the Wikipedia daily, even a small update, and I apologize to all my fans and readers for disrespecting them in my replies in the mailbags, as well as belating the updates. Thank you all. I am Christian Weston Chandler, Mayor of CWCville, Virginia. It actually says Virginia. Have a good and safe day. February 5th, 2010. The basement Rosechus were quite the interesting case. There was Britt Tay Rosechus, a normal-appearing Rosechus who was dirty from being held captive. Mo Rosechus, some kind of cutesy Rosechus who looks like she'd been battling cancer. Bride Rosechus, another mostly normal-looking Rosechus who just so happens to be wearing bridal attire. She was intended to have been involved with Asperchu, but was thrown away in the basement when she proved herself to be incapable of handling his meat. And oh, how can I forget Mary Rosechus? With the most normal-sounding name, Mary is unfortunately a paraplegic and went without a wheelchair for most of her life, forced to drag her lower half wherever she went. Well, around the basement anyway. Sonichu does give her a wheelchair, although fashionably late, but better late than never. Alec was unjustifiably berated simply for using Sonichu in his comics. Chris retconned all of the damage that Alec did to the Sonichu brand by incorporating Alec's versions of Chris's characters into his own comic, but changed them so while they may look similar to his creations, they're actually just Sonichus and Rosechus that were groomed by Alec and forced to impersonate the characters that they were originally supposed to be. Alec's interpretations of Chris's characters were changed in the following ways. Sonichu became Michael Sonichu, Bubbles became Kitty, Wild became Bobby, Angelica became Trisha, Maggie-chan transformed into Swift, and Punchy became Wisp. These characters, much like Asperchu, were afflicted with Asperger's by the doing of Alec, because he's just so damn dastardly and evil. All of Alec's crimes would eventually catch up with him. These transgressions include the murder of Simonla Rosechus and the rape of several innocent Rosechus, and it was about time he faced the wall for his crimes against humanity. This would all lead to his untimely death, but more on that later. In reality, Chris was going to forgive Alec for the transgressions if and only if Alec were to introduce these major changes into his own canon. Alec was not swayed by Chris's attempts to strong-arm his creations and continue to produce the comic how he intended. This, of course, caused Chris to go into an all-caps rage. Alec did, however, incorporate Mitch into his own comic, unlike Chris who just blatantly stole shit without even attempting to cover his own tracks. Alec renamed the character to Mitchchu and made him a gay Sonichu who worked as a stylist, instead of using him to replace Asperchu. Mitchchu was just used as another tool to make fun of Chris for his various failures and poor qualities. Alec's new backstory for the character implied that Mitchchu was raped as a Sony, a younger evolution form of a Sonichu, by Ian Brandon Anderson, the actual representation of Chris in Alec's comic. I think it's absolutely fucking awesome that Alec responded to this in the smartest way that he could have. Instead of running away or conceding to Chris, let alone drastically changing his comic just to own a moron on the internet, he opted to make subtle inclusions that were reminiscent of Chris's own bullshit, but in a way that allowed him to actually expand the comic's lore, make commentary about Chris in a new way, and just stick it to Chris even further. This, my friends, is S-tier trolling. Eventually, Alec and Chris would attempt to mend the wounds of their tragically damaged relationship by hashing things out in a series of phone calls. Chris, as expected, would routinely attempt to dance around the valid criticism and genuine advice, and instead supplement his own backwards anecdotes that confused both Alec and the many listeners of the calls. These calls are important because they give us a window into the mind of Christian Chandler, which allows us to better understand his loose grip on reality, or at least to the best of our ability. It's important to note that these calls appear to be the public starting point of his grand delusions regarding parallel universes and the feelings of fictional characters and what have you. I think it's pretty awesome when a story very carefully informs you of what is going to come in the future, like some kind of foreboding warning that something bad is just over the horizon. I consider this stuff to be cinematic levels of foreshadowing, and I'm all about that shit. Now don't worry, we're not going to sit through every single call and dissect every last thing that was said from each person in excruciating detail, but instead we're going to go over them briefly and discuss the important points. Call number 1 happened on January 22, 2010. Chris and Alec were hoping to rectify some issues regarding the Asperpedia advertisements that were being broadcasted on the Wikipedia. Chris was not happy about their size and scale because they were getting in the way of important site utilities like the introductory box, login page, editing tools, that sort of stuff. All things considered, this is a fair thing to be upset about because it actually hindered the site's functionality. For once, Chris wasn't being totally unreasonable, at least here. The ads needed to be localized to the sidebar. Alec did bring up that Mao was in control of the advertisements as Alec had very little input on them, at least as far as he was telling Chris. So in order to change the content of the ad and their size, it was going to be up to Mao to correct everything. Chris also wanted Alec to change the scope of the content of his Asperchu comic series to tone down the violence and crude humor, totally disregarding his own use of the same adult themes and gratuitous violence.
But anyway, yeah, blood and gore, yeah, that's not a good way to go, especially when you kill even considerable facsimiles of my own characters in that sense and in that detail.
Well, you know, I got a lot of positive response from my fans when I did that, because you know some of my fans had written to me.
Yeah, that's another thing. encourage the fans that were originally my fans to come back to me.
I really do enjoy that Chris built his entire life around the happenings of his fictional world, totally engrossed in the satirized version of his reality that he built up just to share with the rest of the universe. Yet he just so conveniently forgets about all the little intricacies of his work. Just how freaking awesome is that? He can build things up and forget about them entirely when it benefits him to play dumb. Alec even brought up that Chris was not actually in possession of a copyright for Sonichu, considering that he's both a Pokemon and a Sonic the Hedgehog character, which means his creation is entirely dependent on the intellectual properties of established corporations. This all came to a head when Chris challenged Alec on his creation, declaring that he is totally justified to do whatever he wants in his comic, but Alec must adhere to his demands in order to keep producing his stories, as if Chris had any authority over what Alec could do. Chris felt justified in writing his stories his way because he felt Alec was so unfair.
You recreated the KI combo, and then reformatted their personalities in more ways than one without my permission. And then you go ahead and kill off with blood and gore detail, and then your recreation of the Flyer, the Grass, and the Fighter, or also known as Angelica, Wild and Punchy. How do you think I feel about that? How would you like if I went into blood and gory detail of slicing and dicing Jonas Chu, that green one, Jiven, and Matt? I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I just said the green one is Peter Chu. That's his name.
By the end of this conversation, Chris started to feel the heat rising and lied about his phone battery getting low, just so he could hang up and avoid any possible scrutiny from Alec. Some days later, on January 28, 2010, Alec contacted Chris on the phone once more. Call number 2 is where things got a touch more interesting. During the nearly 40-minute call, the name of Asperchu is brought up by Chris, who is adamant that the character would not be happy to be labeled with such a callous name, suggesting that the character would prefer to have their name be Mitch.
I mean, as an individual, within his own world, outside of your control, Asperchu would not want that name. He would be in agreement with me and probably want to change his name to something like Mitch.
But the thing there is, Asperchu is not outside my control because it's a comic, and I am the creator and, manager of his comic universe. So
Okay.
as his creator, I decide what Asperchu wants and what he doesn't want and what his personality is like. I mean, don't you think?
Fairly. Have you ever watched the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Yes, I have. It was a good movie.
Yeah, you got the whole Toon world there. And within that, it would coincide with the comic book world, and every individual comic, published or unpublished, drawn all together. And within that world actually would reside your Asperchu, but he would be with his individual thoughts, and she gave him an adult attitude within his individual thoughts. He would hate having the name of Asperchu because it emphasizes his mental problem or his special condition. And it's like in his process of wanting to move on from that and become more acceptable in society, that he would not want a name that would make him feel like as if he's still living it even after he's fully recovered from it.
Okay, but Chris, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that was still a movie, and everything in it was predetermined by the movie writers and the director. And I mean, there is no, alternate cartoon world in reality. I mean, cartoon characters don't actually think and feel things.
He continues with this idea as it mutates into a discussion about fictional characters having thoughts, feelings, and emotions, all of which are localized inside of a pocket dimension where fake characters and concepts are living and breathing among each other, experiencing their lives and all of that fun stuff. Because of this fascinating digression in thought, we were just then informed about the early signs of the dimensional merge that would plague Chris's feeble mind in the future. Chris likens this hypothetical world to the movie of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where the real tangible world is intertwined with a world of fiction, however that may actually work. Chris attempted to convince Alec of this worldview, even suggesting that perhaps Alec himself was naive for not having considered this nonsense as a possibility. It's funny that he considers other people to be naive when he's the one believing in something without any verifiable evidence. By the end of this call, Alec takes on Chris regarding thievery in his own comic, such as the taking of the character Sonichu, created by Alec Christopher George, adding some boobs to it and calling it Simone La Rosechus. Again, rules for thee, but not for me. The next conversation happened on the 30th of January 2010, and it was significantly shorter. Call number 3 ran for just under 11 minutes and didn't really cover too much ground. This call primarily focused on Chris apologizing for his misdeeds towards Alec, and ripping off Evan's character and all of that shit. He retracted his theft, or he claimed that he did, just so that way he could get people off of his back. Nothing really too interesting or important for the larger story, but definitely worth note as it was merely part of the Chris Chan cycle. The ads were brought up once more, and the ED page, you get the idea. Just the usual fanfare for the internet's least favorite autistic. Call number 4 is where things get a bit fun again. This happened on February 1st, 2010. Chris was slated to create an apology of sorts that intended to rectify his past actions in his typical emotionally absent and half-assed way that he's known for.
I would like to take this moment to apologize to Mr. Alec Benson Leary for the curses and death threats and mislabelings I have placed upon him, such as not reading his own quote-unquote fan mail and all that. And also I apologize for misunderstanding his Asperchu as being a parody and labeling it as such. Asperchu is Alec Benson Leary's own creation, not mine. And I retract all the past statements I have made against that, and of his book being anything parodic or copycatishly to anything in my book. Anyway, along with that, I also would like to apologize to Evan for offending him and by taking false claim of his Sonichu character, and I'm happy to give that back to him. And I retract all ownership of the Sonichu character.
Alec was pissed that Chris was not being fair in his negotiations regarding the Wikipedia and the Asperpedia. He had had enough of Chris's bullshit and attempted to dissect why he was such a hypocrite through a lesson on plagiarism. Chris, of course, believes everything that he does is satire or parody or something similar, totally disregarding his own hypocritical actions and his blatant theft of concepts and ideas. When someone else makes fun of him or uses his creations in a satirical way, Chris views it as plagiarism. Chris, in his own fervorous stupidity, refused to understand why this was a problem. I mean, he's autistic, he's always got to be the victim because the internet is so cruel and uncaring and mean. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe Chris deserves a bit of slack. Who am I kidding?
Okay, Chris, let me think of an example for you. Let's say that I take Family Guy, and you know Peter Griffin on Family Guy? Let's say that I make a comic, and I just use Peter Griffin as my, main character in my comic. And I do that for a few years. And then Seth MacFarlane comes knocking on my door and says, "Hey, you didn't ask for permission to use Peter Griffin." Do you think it's okay for me to just right then change it and say, "Oh, okay, I'm just going to pretend like I never based my Peter Griffin off of Family Guy"? Do you think that would solve the problem? You can't retract a fact.
Let's see.
Does that make sense? I find it, I think personally, I am most offended by your accusations of me stealing your Sonichu and of Asperchu being a theft of you and all of that, when all along you had been stealing Sonichu from someone else. Why is plagiarism okay for you if it's not okay for anyone else? Why is parody okay for you? Okay, Chris, why is parody and plagiarism, why are those concepts okay for you to do, but they're not okay for anyone else to do? Will you tell me that?
Okay, I guess I cannot think of a good answer for that.
Yeah, that's because there really isn't one. You understand that, right? The same rules have to apply to everyone. You don't get different rules than other artists. You need to atone for your mistakes.
Call number 5 occurred on February 2nd, 2010. Alec was not satisfied with the apology video that Chris had haphazardly thrown together. The apology didn't even cover every point that Alec had brought up prior, particularly not adequately apologizing to Evan and just being a dick to Alec's fans. This went about how you would expect, but a key interesting point is when Chris impersonates his own mother to get out of the call, all just by changing the pitch of his voice. Oh yeah, how could that not work? Alec was trying his best to reason with the most unreasonable person to ever grace the internet, and because of Chris's own weak will, he had to try to bamboozle him. It didn't work, but it's damn funny.
Isn't that how that works? You made all your characters slander me.
Excuse me a moment. Yes? Hey, Christian, listen. I need you to go play a case in the kitchen. Oh, okay, Mom. I'll take care of this. And then go kitty you out, would you? Sure. I'll be right there. I'll be right there. Yeah, my mom's telling me to go clean up keys, too. I gotta go. So, is there a number I can call you back at?
Hell, if I didn't know better, I'd say that's the real woman herself. Chris totally has a dynamic range for his dulcet tones. The calls at this point were getting shorter and shorter, with this one only running about 6 minutes. It was clear that Chris would do whatever he could to get out of situations where he felt uncomfortable, refusing to take any of the heat, even if it's just from some nobody on the internet. 2 days later, on February 4th, 2010, we finally got the next part. Call number 6 was a welcome return to longer calls, when Alec finally gave Chris a taste of his own medicine. Chris historically has always made demands of other people because he finds it unreasonable for him to have to change the way he acts for others, but rest assured you will have to live up to his standard and do things his way if you want him to do whatever you want. Most of this call was just Alec hammering in his own demands while Chris attempted to understand what was happening, as he couldn't seem to process his own toolset being used against him. If Chris were to adhere to Alec's demands, then the Asperpedia advertisements on the Wikipedia would be removed. However, if he failed to do so, the ads would only increase in intensity. Alec's demands were the following. Chris had to admit that Alec had a larger and more robust fan base. Chris had to admit that he never asked for permission from Evan to use Simone La Rosechus. He had to confess that he never even created the Simone La character, instead piggybacking off of a design made by Evan. He also had to admit that he edited Simone La's Wikipedia article in order to spread misinformation, namely that he created the character on his own. He had to finally accept that Evan had requested Chris stop using the Simone La character because of infringement. He had to apologize to Alec for calling him naive, stealing Asperchu, and the false chaotic combo, and for insinuating that Alec kept Rosechus in his basement for his own rape misadventures. Oh, and of course he had to apologize to Mal for cursing him and must give a forgiveness blessing to him.
I'd also like you to apologize for insinuating that I keep female prisoners in my basement and use them as a unwilling harem and rape them, because I don't do anything of the sort. That's just creepy. I don't know where you got that idea. I mean, I can kind of see some of the other complaints that you had were based on, like direct misunderstanding of things, but the, me raping female prisoner things, that came out of left field. Where'd you get that idea?
Okay, well, actually, no. I never used the word rape. You just had them in prison and you treat them like hamsters. You did not rape them.
What do you mean treat them like hamsters?
Just keep them in cages, giant hamster wheels, giant water bottles, and food pellets.
Okay, even if you didn't use the word rape, what do you think the impression is people are going to get when you suggest that someone keeps female prisoners in their basement? They're going to think that said prisoners are being raped by their captor. And I mean, that seems like a pretty obvious insinuation, even if you don't use the word directly.
Okay.
He had to admit that he had been trolling Alec, which is ironic considering Chris was always the butt of the joke. There were other things, like he had to admit that he was lazy and he didn't have a reason to not create comic pages, and that he had to apologize for disrespecting his fans. He had to violently kill off Simone La, wear his medallion and high school ring while filming an apology video, look sincere, and admit that Sonichu was a doomed franchise that would go nowhere. All in all, things that Chris really didn't want to say. He would do very few of these things, trying his best to stay out of any kind of trouble by avoiding conflict and not doing the things that were demanded of him. Again, if he were the one making demands, he'd be stomping his feet and screaming at his PlayStation Eye camera until his ludicrous demands were met. His apology videos were not satisfactory to say the least.
Don't listen to that stupid Mal and his advertisements. Do I look dead to you? No, I'm alive, safe, well, and healthy. As for the announcements, I admit Alec has a sizable fan base, possibly greater than my own, currently. I originally had permission for use Sonichu in my comics from Evan, but then he took it away. Simona was not mine, so I'm giving it back to him by killing her later. I've been editing Simona article. I'll just delete it altogether later today or later on. I apologize to Alec for calling him naive multiple times, and apologize to Mal. Here's a forgiveness blessing. Forgiveness blessing. There you go. I just been hard forgive me, but I just had to dig a bunch of snow. It's snowing now. My car is stuck. And I apologize to Alec for taking Asperchu and his recreated characters for re-editing and whatnot. There'll be a page later. And I had no excuse for not updating them some days. But real life just happens, though. That's my only excuse, real life. Other than that, I have no excuse. One more thing. I admit that I trolled Alec in a sense like I was trolled before, and I apologize for that. I didn't want to leave that detail out. I trolled Alec, and I apologize for that. And I will not troll him anymore. Okay.
On February 8, 2010, call number 7 took place. The Wikipedia had been locked down on February 6 to prevent edits, much to Chris's chagrin. But weirdly enough, he was unusually quiet during this call, only talking when poked and prodded by the creator of Asperchu. Alec was not satisfied with Chris's attempt at a half-assed apology video, suggesting that Chris was just doing what he thought would get him out of trouble without taking the time to consider how he had got himself there and what he was actually apologizing for. Realistically, that's all Chris has ever done. He responded by rarely engaging when Alec would pressure him, only giving enough of a response to keep Alec satiated for the time being. Chris also blamed his broken-down computer for his inability to submit any new pages for Sonichu. Alec counters this by bringing up that Chris could, instead, tap into his video game budget to pay for PC repairs or a new computer entirely.
So what you're saying is you don't take care of the equipment that you need to do your comic.
I admit I need a new computer.
Why can't you buy one? I've seen
one right now.
I've seen, videos of you in your room. You've got like a 40-inch HD TV in there. You've got your PlayStation 3. You've got like a wall full of video games, but you can't afford a basic computer. Like, nothing fancy, costs maybe a couple $100.
Immediately after discussing the prospect of selling pieces of media that he no longer derives any pleasure from, Alec takes the opportunity to really lay into Chris, causing the virgin with rage to hang up.
How many days have you missed since you promised you would upload 2 pages a day? You don't care. Your actions say that you don't care. Actions speak louder than words, Chris. I don't even consider you competition anymore. Do you know that? Because you obviously, my competition are artists that actually care about their work, and you play video games all day. And then you sleep in because you have nothing to do. And then when you do actually take time to do something, you don't actually work on your comic, you just attack me. And then when I'm nice to you, you continue to attack me. And then when I get mad and yell at you, you back down right away because you can't stand up in a fight. And then when I'm nice again, because I think to myself, I don't want to keep yelling because I'm not that kind of person, then you become disrespectful again. Do you have anything to say, Chris? He hung up.
Call number 8 happened on February 18, 2010, 10 whole days after their last telephone conversation. Chris was still bitter as expected, but the inclusion of Sonichu Revolution in the Wikipedia ads had him all riled up. Sonichu Revolution was Alec's answer to the drought of Sonichu comics, while Chris was busy whining about the Simonla fiasco. Chris was unable to edit the site, and Alec felt that he could solve Chris's problems for him, such as dealing with the whole Simonla problem by including his own handmade Sonichu comics to supplement Chris's own. This comic showed Mitch and Sonichu brutally killing two Raichus, and Simonla doing Chris's own work for him. He also reaffirmed the allegedly incestuous gay relationship between Chris and his own Sonichu. Chris was unable to sway Alec's opinion on the matter, as Alec had already taken care of a majority of Chris's own problems for him, because he's such a fair and caring individual. Chris ultimately folded here because he wasn't going to get his way no matter how much of a stink he tried to kick up. Chris's own opinions on homosexuality were brought up, as he now sees them in a more positive light, and by that, he means he wants to see them vaccinated of their ailment and turned into true and honest, respectable straight folk. He felt that this was an adequate way to save these people from having their souls eternally damned to the deepest pits of hell.
Well, just to be clear, do you still want a vaccine for homosexuals?
I'm sorry, I did not understand that. Could you repeat that, please?
Do you want to create a vaccine to eliminate homosexuality? Do you understand that?
Yeah, okay, I understood that. So, yeah, you're asking me that right now. Or
yes.
you just let me know. Okay.
No, yeah, I'm asking you right now.
Okay. In an attempt to make a better world, I would support it. I would support that.
Okay, so when you said that you don't have problems with gays anymore, that wasn't actually true. Well, like I said, I'm not gay, but I have a number of gay friends, a few family members that are gay, and that's part of who they are. That's part of their identity. Why would you want to take that away from them? What about removing homosexuality would make the world a better place? Shouldn't be that hard, Chris, because you already established a predicate that no gays equals world is a better place. So, having said that, that must mean that you do have an idea of how the two things are connected.
What two things?
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Chris, you said no gays equals a world is a better place. That's no gays is point one. That connects to world is better,
okay.
point two. How do those connect?
Okay.
What is...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, now I get it. I mean, it's just that, I'm getting an incoming call right now, and
well,
like
you should probably ignore.
It's
so
like
please,
it's hard to know because it's like it cancels your vocal input out at that point when the.
Oh, okay. Well, did you? Yeah. Did you hear my point though? Please explain how no gays equals world better.
Okay. Well, I'm not necessarily saying. I'm not saying that as in reference to them as people. I'm saying that in reference and like.
Well, removing homosexuality equals world better. Explain that.
Because there will be less risk of those people going to hell.
Hell?
Yeah, when they die.
What do you... Oh, you mean instead of heaven?
Yeah.
So you're saying gay people go to hell?
Another great point is when Alec starts to poke holes in Chris's claims about having such a hard life doing menial chores. Chris got so frustrated that he started spamming various buttons on his phone in order to give the illusion that the call got fucked up. After the number tones, Alec had to call back to continue the conversation. Chris tried to play it off as if he had a poor reception. Yeah, sure.
Well, you said some chores around your house too, like besides shoveling. What else do you have to do?
I clean the kitchen. I vacuum. I move stuff around. I clean the bathroom as well. I do a lot of things around the house.
You kind of sound like you're talking to someone who has not seen that video tour of your house right now. And I want to let you know that I actually have seen it. So I'm pretty sure that house is not. Chris, can you hear me? Hello? Chris, are you pressing buttons?
Hey, Alec?
Hey, Chris, did we get disconnected there?
Yeah, afraid we did. It happens
Yeah.
to me between me and my gal pal as well in our conversation sometimes. Reception goes bad during this time of night.
The last in the series, call number 9, occurred on February 25th, 2010, just one day after Chris's 28th birthday. Alec had called to inquire about the bizarre trial that had happened in the most recent set of comic pages for Sonichu number 10. The Simonla character had finally been killed off at the request of Evan, after much deliberation of course, but this was undone by having a new offspring by the name of Sandy, which was more or less the same character as her mother. This was an obvious attempt to circumvent any rules because Evan never said that Chris couldn't create a new character from what was being removed. Sneaky, sneaky. The trial itself was unusually violent, even for Chris, which is interesting because Chris always argued that his comic book was designed to be read and enjoyed by children, just like the Sonic the Hedgehog comics that they were loosely based on. Alec, Sean August Watley, another comic parody writer, Evan, and Mal were convicted of plagiarism, writing violent comic pages, swearing, and worst of all, mockery. The only applicable punishment for such transgressions against our society is for each offending individual to be put to death. Alec was put in an electric chair scheduled to be fried to a singed crisp, where basically everyone in the room had to press a button set before them in a 10-button electric chair system, where every person needed to be locked in for the electrical charge to course through Alec's body, thus killing him. This seems pretty fair. Writing parody comics should be punishable by death. I mean, it only makes sense. Sean was hung up by his wrist, dangling as the blood was being offset in his body, only to be shot to pieces. Mao, however, was confronted and twisted like a pretzel by Chris via his freaky-ass autism-powered psychic abilities. Evan was horrifically tortured and murdered by Sandy and Wild. Sandy drilled into various points in his body using their hand drills or whatever the fuck they were, eventually vaporizing him with the help of her father, Wild. Remember, this is not bizarre or unusually cruel. It's totally normal. Chris stood by his actions because he was furious, filled to the brim with anger toward the people online that had made disparaging comments about him in his oh-so-important plagiarist paradise of a comic. Since Chris had already apologized, though, this should all be forgiven, especially because the events in the comics are just a work of fiction. This was, in his eyes, a means to get out some of his frustrations. I mean, I suppose it is a way to do it, just not an ideal one. Another fascinating point in all of this is when Christian Love Day was brought up. Christian Love Day, also known as Christian's birthday, was first declared a holiday by Chris on the 7th of January 2010. This is significant because on February 24th in 2009, Magi-chan deployed a gay vaccine to the world of Sonichu, which used Chris's heterosexual blood to cure all homosexuals and asexuals and what have you. Alec brought up this most holy of days because during a recent video Chris had uploaded on the matter, he stole and slightly tweaked a speech from the movie Independence Day. Once again, Chris had lifted something from a different piece of media that people likely didn't expect him to consume, only for him to regurgitate it into a mutated mass of dog feces.
Good morning. In less than an hour, Sonichu fans from here will join others from around the world, as you will be witnessing the largest personal change in the history of mankind. Mankind. That word should have new meaning for us all today. We cannot be consumed by our petty differences anymore. We will be united in our common interests. Perhaps it is fate that today is Mexico's Flag Day. And we will once again be saluting an image of our freedom. Not just from trolling, loneliness, or persecution, but also from heartbreak. We are fighting for our right to love, to be honest. And when the sun sets today, the 24th of February will no longer be known as only a Mexican holiday, but as today Sonichu fans declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We are going to live on. We are going to survive. To celebrate today, we celebrate our Christian Love Day.
Finally, Alec called out Chris for his laziness and sloppy attempts at business regarding his comic. He carefully pointed out that Chris obviously didn't want to make anything of his comic because he's too lazy, expecting everything to be handed to him or dropped into his lap at the very least. Chris would ultimately hang up during this grilling, thus ending the tale of Alec and Chris phone calls. In such a fitting way, too. It all came to a close with Chris hanging up, just like he had done time and time again leading up to this, and as he would likely continue to do in the future. Chris has always ran from his problems when things became too much, and he will undoubtedly continue this behavior going forward.
So what you're telling me now is you have no intention of ever making money off Sonichu. Because if it is just a work of art for its own sake, that's fine. But you keep promising, deadlines that you miss, and you keep saying you're going to publish it and make money off of it. Do you not want to make money off Sonichu anymore?
No, I would like to make money off of Sonichu.
Well, okay, you're cheapening it then. It's not a work of art anymore.
Because I've had too many inputs from bad people like the trolls.
What the hell do trolls have to do with it, Chris?
And
I have you as a
from,
troll, and my comic kept going just fine.
And also
How do trolls control what goes in the comic? Go ahead.
It's when they really tick me off, and then it's like putting poison into the water supply.
Why do you keep responding to trolls then? And another thing, you have a really broad definition of trolls, it seems, because you think that people that ask you questions you don't like in your mailbag are trolls. You think homosexual people are trolls just for existing because you want to cure gays. I think the ironic thing there is gays would probably consider you a troll because you want to destroy their identity when they haven't done anything to you. You think I'm a troll, and I've been trying to help you.
Well, I'm sorry. Sometimes as things have been trying to elaborate, I get misunderstood often, and it just really makes me feel like, I don't know, I feel like I'm being misunderstood.
On the 2nd of March 2010, Chris put out an apology video for Alec and Evan and everyone else. It's your typical nonsense that nobody gives a shit about, and Chris didn't even care to actually put forth any effort. The only thing worth noting here is that Chris was wearing both the Sonichu and Asperchu medallions. It appeared as though maybe this was a period of peace for the people of CWCville, but we all know how things would eventually turn out. He took off the medallion and restored it to its container, the tomb in which it would reside until it was burned in the house fire. From August 6th to the 23rd, 2011, Chris returned from an 8-month absence on YouTube, wherein he'd expose many people that had wronged him, giving each person a deadline to rectify their past actions, or else punishment would be dealt out by the mighty hand of Christian Weston Chandler. Alec was called out on August 9th, and Chris demanded that Alec apologize for everything that he had done to him. Alec, of course, didn't immediately respond because he was either preoccupied with having a life or he didn't give a shit, but I'm betting it's a mixture of both. Chris was adamant that he would reveal the true identity of Alec if he didn't apologize by August 31st. But of course, Chris decided to not wait for the deadline that he had placed himself. He improperly identified Alec as Christopher Paul Whitney, also known as Fat Man, a renowned overweight YouTuber with enough fat to shade you in the summer and warm you in the winter.
'Tis another fine day for revealing, because I have not heard anything from Alec Benson Leary, also known as Christopher, and the due date has been reached. It is time for total revelation. Alec Benson Leary. His real name is Christopher Paul Fat Man Whitney. From San Antonio, Texas. Age 36. Unemployed and on welfare. His interests include hot tubbing, video games, retirement, Xbox, folk music, theft and fraud, milk, comics and dip, and eating online. He's responsible for Asperchu, CWCipedia, and all mockings and slanders associated, and copyright infringement upon my own characters of Sonichu and an Asperchu somewhere else. He also has ties with the gameplays, donations and whatnot.
Fat Man didn't take this very kindly, returning the favor by calling Chris a dumbass, which was more than deserved.
Hi, folks. Fat Man here again, and I just want to say that Christian Weston Chandler, or CWC, or whatever his dumbass name is a dumbass, folks. And he's a dumbass because he thinks I stole some Sonichu shitty characters, or he thinks I'm Alec Benson Liry, but I ain't no Alec Benson Liry. My name's Christopher Paul Whitney, folks. I live in Rumpton, not San Antonio, Texas. This guy is such a fucking dumbass, folks, okay? And he's a dumbass, and I did not steal his Sonichu, and I am not Alec Benson Liry, I am Christopher Paul Whitney. So including Christian Weston Chandler is a dumbass, and he should stop being a fucking idiot.
Alec did eventually get back to responding to Chris by posting a video of himself eating a stick of butter. Unfortunately, it appears that this is now lost media as the Quickie doesn't have any archives of this video. Kind of strange that this of all things wasn't archived, but I'll just assume it was a mistake. In the years since this debacle, Chris has seemingly forgotten about Alec, rarely if ever bringing him up, let alone Asperchu or Mitch or whatever stupid name he's given the character by this point. When the idea guys still had their influence over Chris, they actively exploited his insecurities regarding his perception of reality, namely the feelings of fictional characters and the dimensional stuff that was briefly hinted at during his calls with Alec. The idea guys convinced Chris that there is indeed an infinite amount of parallel timelines, but one in particular houses every single last character from any work of fiction, and at some point in the near future, despite the goalpost being moved quite often, our dimension will merge with that one, and only half the population will survive the transition to the new reality. At one point, Chris wanted to know for sure what had actually happened regarding Alec and the other Asperpedia 4 trolls during and after the events of Sonichu number 10, particularly if they were actually executed or saved by becoming Amish. One of the idea guys is a fan of Payday 2, taking the character Bodhi from the game and applying his backstory to Alec. They told Chris that Alec had escaped custody. Chris was provided an image of Bodhi, with a bold claim that the photo was indeed of Alec Benson Leary. Asperchu is also listed in the 69 destined Sonichus and Rosechus. This list was yet another thing that was drilled into Chris's delicate think meat by the idea guys. I'm not entirely sure what the hell this list is even for, what it means, and what its larger implications actually are, but I gotta say, it is pretty lengthy. If I had to guess, maybe these characters are canon while any that are not on the list aren't? Who knows, man? Asperchu is listed as number 46, while 49 to 54 and 56 are empty. Again, this probably has some kind of significance in Chris's mind, but I can't discern what the hell any of this means. Maybe it's something ominous and world-changing, or, more than likely, it's a bunch of nonsense that doesn't matter. All in all, Alec's importance to the greater story of Christian Weston Chandler is kind of a tricky thing to place. While he did manage to get some great reactions out of the internet's favorite punching bag, it might have been mostly for nothing outside of some laughs. Chris really doesn't seem to think about Alec much, and even forgot who allegedly made that beautiful Asperchu medallion. While he may have just rubbed Chris the wrong way, and don't get me wrong, that's still hilarious, his interactions with him at least enlightened us to the very delicate parts of Chris's own psyche. Without Alec's intervention, we may have never seen the early signs of the dimensional merge, and perhaps the idea guys would not have gotten their hooks into him, or maybe not as easily anyway. In the end, I love the wackier stories from the world of Christian Weston Chandler, and I long for the simpler times when trolling weirdos online was still funny and fruitful. But these days, people just shit up anything they can because they don't understand what actually makes trolling a cow actually work in a good way. Christian, as always, is a warning to all of us. We can all turn into someone like Chris if we don't take care of ourselves. Alec properly shook up Chris regarding his Sonichu comics, and while they were never good, it did give Chris some insight into what he needed to change, even if he didn't actually give a damn about any valid criticism that was shared. Alec and his Asperchu comic were a necessary part of the gradual telling of Chris's story, and I'm thankful so much of it was archived, even if it was lowbrow at best. And where's that Alec Butter video? I gotta see it for myself, damn it! But that being said, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. I've also got a Newgrounds account if that's your thing. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.